The morning sun cast long shadows across Rachel West's apartment as she methodically packed her climbing gear. Each piece of equipment carried memories of adventures shared with her brother Lucas. The harness he'd adjusted countless times until it fit perfectly. The carabiners they'd used to teach her the basics of safety, and the worn climbing shoes that had carried her through countless training sessions under his watchful eye. At 25, Rachel had built a life far from the towering peaks of Absaroka Range that had shaped her childhood in Cody, Wyoming. Her apartment in Denver was sleek and modern, filled with awards from endurance competitions and survival courses. A sealed envelope from the National Security Academy lay on her kitchen counter, containing her acceptance letter and reporting instructions for the following month. It represented everything she'd worked towards since leaving Cody, a chance to protect others and honor Lucas's memory. Yet something pulled at her, an inexplicable urge that had grown stronger with each passing day. The mountains were calling, their siren song impossible to ignore. Rachel had always felt most alive in their presence, where the air was thin and crisp, and every decision could mean the difference between triumph and disaster. Lucas had taught her to respect that power, to move with it rather than against it. "You have to feel the mountain's rhythm," he'd always said, his voice carrying that mixture of authority and gentleness that made him such a natural teacher. It's not just about reaching the top, it's about understanding why you're climbing in the first place. Rachel zipped up her backpack and walked to the window, staring at the distant Rockies. They were magnificent. But they weren't her mountains. The Absaroka Range had a different character altogether, more wild, more mysterious, holding secrets in their remote valleys and windswept peaks that few had ever uncovered. Her phone buzzed with a message from her best friend Sarah. "Are you sure about this solo climb? The academy starts in 3 weeks." Rachel's fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing, "I need to do this. One last climb before everything changes." But even as she sent the message, Rachel knew this wasn't just about saying goodbye to her old life. Something was drawing her back to those specific peaks, something connected to the strange circumstances of Lucas's disappearance 5 years ago. He had been at the height of his climbing career, more careful and skilled than anyone she knew. His disappearance during a solo expedition had never made sense to her. As she shouldered her pack and headed for her car, Rachel caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. The same determined green eyes that Lucas had possessed stared back at her, set in a face that had grown leaner and more focused with years of training. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her athletic frame carried the strength of someone who had made survival in harsh conditions their specialty. The drive to Cody would take several hours. Giving her plenty of time to think, Rachel had planned her route carefully, choosing the same trails she and Lucas had explored countless times together. But this time, she would push further, heading toward the remote area locals called Perdition Peak, a place Lucas had mentioned in his last phone call before his disappearance. As the city fell away behind her and the landscape began to change, Rachel felt a familiar tightening in her chest. The mountains were growing larger on the horizon, their jagged peaks piercing the clouds like ancient guardians. She rolled down the windows, letting the cool morning air flood the car. The scent of pine and wild sage brought back a flood of memories. Lucas teaching her to read weather patterns, showing her how to find safe handholds, explaining the importance of trusting your instincts in the wilderness. But mixed with these memories was something else, a growing sense that this journey would be different from any she had undertaken before. The mountain weather forecast had shown unusual patterns for this time of year, with unexpected cold fronts and strong winds predicted. Yet Rachel felt more certain than ever that she needed to make this climb. As she passed the "Welcome to Cody" sign, her heart rate quickened. The familiar silhouette of the Absaroka Range loomed ahead, calling to her with an intensity she couldn't explain. Rachel gripped the steering wheel tighter, remembering Lucas's words from long ago. The mountains don't just test your strength. They test your heart. They show you who you really are. She was about to discover exactly what he meant. The ranger station at the base of the Absaroka Range stood as a weathered sentinel against the backdrop of towering peaks. Rachel parked her car and stepped out, inhaling deeply. The air here was different, crisper, purer, charged with something she couldn't quite name. The morning sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple, but dark clouds were gathering in the distance, promising changing weather. Inside the station, old Jim Carter looked up from his desk, his weathered face breaking into a surprised smile. "Rachel West, haven't seen you in these parts for years." He stood, his ranger uniform as neat as ever despite the early hour. "Do your father mentioned you were joining the academy? What brings you back?" Rachel signed the climbing register, her pen hesitating slightly over the solo climber checkbox. "One last climb before training starts. Thought I'd revisit some old roots." Jim's expression shifted subtly. "Weather's been strange lately. Had to rescue 3 experienced climbers last week. Said they kept hearing things up there, seeing things too." He paused, studying her face. "You're headed up toward Perdition Peak, aren't you?" She nodded, maintaining a neutral expression despite the sudden tightness in her chest. Jim had been one of the lead searchers when Lucas disappeared. She could see the unasked questions in his eyes. "That's rough territory, especially alone," he continued, his voice gentle. "The wildlife's been acting odd too. Bears are moving in unusual patterns, staying higher up than normal for this time of year." Rachel shouldered her pack, checking her radio's signal. "I've trained for this, Jim. Besides, Lucas taught me everything he knew about these mountains." The old ranger's eyes softened at the mention of her brother. "He sure did. Just be careful up there, Rachel. Some things about these mountains even your brother didn't understand." Outside, Rachel began her ascent along the familiar trail, her boots crunching on loose gravel. The path started easily enough, winding through dense pine forest, but something felt different from her memories. The usual chattering of birds was muted, replaced by a strange stillness that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. 2 hours into her climb, she reached the first landmark, a distinctive split boulder where she and Lucas used to rest. Rachel pulled out her water bottle and protein bar, settling against the cool stone. That's when she noticed it, a series of deep scratches in the rock that hadn't been there before. They formed a pattern too regular to be random animal marks, yet too crude to be man-made. As she traced the marks with her fingers, a sudden gust of wind whipped through the trees, carrying with it a sound that made her freeze, something between a whistle and a hum, unlike anything she'd heard in these mountains before. Rachel quickly pulled out Lucas's old journal from her pack, flipping through the pages until she found his detailed sketches of local wildlife signs. Nothing matched what she was seeing. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the shadows around her seemed to deepen, despite the morning sun. Rachel zipped up her jacket and continued upward, her senses heightened. The trail grew steeper, requiring more focus with each step. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The way the branches moved in the wind, the patterns of moss on the rocks, even the texture of the ground beneath her boots. Near midday, she reached a small plateau that offered a view of her intended route. Perdition Peak loomed in the distance, its summit shrouded in swirling clouds. Rachel pulled out her binoculars, scanning the terrain ahead. Movement caught her eye, something large moving through the trees far below, but the angle and distance made it impossible to identify. As she adjusted the focus, a flash of color caught her attention. Near a cluster of rocks about half a mile ahead, something red fluttered in the wind. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. It looked like a piece of fabric, definitely man-made, in an area rarely traversed by casual hikers. The wind picked up again. bringing with it that strange humming sound. This time, it seemed to come from multiple directions at once, creating an eerie harmony that made Rachel's skin prickle. She pulled out her compass, watching in disbelief as the needle began to spin erratically. "The mountains have their own rules," Lucas had once told her. "Sometimes they show you things that don't make sense. The trick is knowing which signs to follow and which ones to leave alone." Rachel tucked the compass away and readjusted her pack. Whatever was happening here, she had a growing certainty that it was connected to Lucas's last climb. The strange marks, the unusual sounds, the mysterious fabric. They were like pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. As she resumed her climb, a distant rumble of thunder echoed through the valleys. The dark clouds were moving faster now, gathering above Perdition Peak like a crown. Rachel checked her watch and did a quick calculation. She needed to find a suitable camping spot before the weather turned. But even as she searched for level ground, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just choosing a campsite. She was choosing to step deeper into whatever mystery these mountains held. Rachel found a relatively sheltered spot for her camp beneath an overhanging rock face, just as the first drops of rain began to fall. The location felt strangely familiar, though she was certain she'd never camped here before. As she set up her tent with practiced efficiency, her thoughts drifted to Lucas's last known campsite, found empty and undisturbed 5 years ago, just a few miles from this very spot. The rain intensified, drumming against the rocky overhang. Rachel ducked into her tent and pulled out Lucas's old journal, its pages worn and dog-eared from countless readings. She'd brought it, hoping to find some clue she might have missed, some hint about what drew him to this particular area. As she flipped through the pages, something caught her eye, a sketch she'd never noticed before, partially hidden in the binding crease. It showed the same strange mark she'd seen on the split boulder earlier that day. Beneath the sketch, Lucas had written a single line, "They're trying to show me something." A flash of lightning illuminated the tent, followed by a rolling boom of thunder. In that brief moment of brilliant light, Rachel saw a shadow move across her tent wall, too large to be a branch, too deliberate to be the wind. Her heart pounding, she reached for her flashlight, but before she could turn it on, she heard it. That same haunting hum she'd noticed earlier, now clearer and closer. The sound seemed to resonate with something in her chest, creating a sensation of both peace and unease. Rachel held her breath, listening intently. Mixed with the humming was another sound, the soft crunch of footsteps on wet gravel, circling her campsite. "Hello!" she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. No response came, but the footsteps stopped. When she unzipped the tent and shone her flashlight outside, there was nothing there. Only the rain and the darkness, and far above, the looming silhouette of Perdition Peak against the storm clouds. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams of Lucas. In them, he was always just ahead of her on the trail, always turning a corner or disappearing behind a rock face before she could catch up. His voice echoed in her mind, "The mountains speak to those who know how to listen." Dawn broke with unexpected clarity, the storm having passed during the night. As Rachel emerged from her tent, she noticed something odd. A perfect circle of small stones had been arranged around her campsite, each stone placed precisely the same distance apart. She was certain they hadn't been there when she'd set up camp. After a quick breakfast, Rachel packed up and continued her ascent. The morning air was crisp and clean, but that strange stillness remained. About an hour into her climb, she heard it, a soft whimpering sound coming from somewhere off the trail. Following the sound, she came to the edge of a steep ravine. There, trapped on a narrow ledge about 20 feet below, was a bear cub. The small brown creature looked up at her with frightened eyes, pawing helplessly at the rocky wall. Rachel's heart clenched. She knew how dangerous approaching a bear cub could be, but something about its predicament struck a deep chord within her. The situation eerily mirrored a story Lucas had told her about his own encounter with a trapped animal in these mountains. He'd said it was that experience that first made him realize there was something different about this range, something that defied ordinary explanation. As Rachel assessed the situation, calculating the safest way to help the cub, she noticed more strange markings on the rocks nearby. These were different from the ones she'd seen before. They seemed to form a pattern, almost like writing, but in no alphabet she recognized. The marks appeared fresh, as if they'd been carved recently. A low growl rumbled from somewhere above her. Rachel slowly looked up to see the mother bear, watching from a higher ledge, her massive form silhouetted against the morning sky. But something was off about the bear's behavior. Instead of showing aggression, it seemed to be waiting, observing. That's when Rachel noticed something glinting near the cub's ledge. Something metallic caught the sunlight. It looked like a carabiner, the kind Lucas always used. Her breath caught in her throat. How had it gotten there? The ledge was far from any established climbing route. The humming sound returned, stronger now, seeming to emanate from the rocks themselves. The mother bear's ears twitched at the sound. But she remained eerily calm. Rachel felt a strange sensation wash over her, as if she were being guided by an unseen force. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that she needed to help the cub, and that doing so would somehow bring her closer to understanding what happened to Lucas. As she began to unpack her climbing gear, the wind carried what sounded like a whispered voice, so faint she might have imagined it. But the words seemed clear. Trust the signs. Rachel looked up at the mother bear, then down at the trapped cub, and finally at the mysterious markings surrounding them. Everything was connected, she realized. The strange sounds, the markings, the trapped cub, Lucas's disappearance. She was being drawn into something larger than herself, a mystery that had been waiting for her return to these mountains. With steady hands, she began preparing her ropes for descent, knowing that what she was about to do was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Perhaps, she thought, it was both. The world narrowed to a singular focus as Rachel began her careful descent toward the trapped cub. Every movement was calculated, each placement of her hands and feet deliberate. The mother bear watched from above, maintaining that unusual stillness that defied natural behavior. The humming sound continued, now seeming to pulse in rhythm with Rachel's heartbeat. Slow and steady, she whispered to herself, echoing Lucas's words from countless training sessions. The rock face was treacherous, slick from the previous night's rain. As she lowered herself, she noticed more of the strange markings, these ones forming a distinct pattern that seemed to point downward toward the ledge where the cub waited. 20 feet had never felt so far. The cub whimpered again, but remained surprisingly calm as Rachel approached. She could now see the metallic object clearly. It was definitely a carabiner, and not just any model. It was a specialized type that Lucas had custom-ordered, with his distinctive mark etched into the metal. Her hands trembled slightly as she realized this couldn't be a coincidence. "Hey there, little one." Rachel spoke softly to the cub as she reached the ledge. The animal's brown eyes met hers, showing an intelligence that seemed almost human. Up close, she could see that it wasn't injured, just trapped by the sheer walls surrounding the narrow ledge. The humming grew stronger, and Rachel felt a strange warmth spread through her body despite the cool mountain air. The mother bear shifted position above, moving with deliberate grace to maintain eye contact. In that moment, Rachel felt as if she were part of something ancient and powerful, a ceremony of sorts playing out on this remote mountainside. As she secured her position and prepared to help the cub, movement caught her eye. In a crevice just behind where the cub was trapped, something fluttered, a piece of paper, weathered but preserved in the protected space. Rachel's heart leaped as she recognized the handwriting visible on its exposed edge. With one hand maintaining her secure hold on the rock face, she reached for her rescue sling with the other. The cub watched her movements with surprising patience. "Okay, buddy," she murmured, "let's get you back to your mom." The rescue itself seemed almost choreographed. The cub allowed her to secure the sling around it with minimal fuss, as if it had been waiting for this moment. As Rachel carefully lifted the animal, the mother bear remained calm, watching the process with what could only be described as understanding. Just as she was about to begin lifting the cub to safety, a powerful gust of wind swirled around them. The humming intensified, and Rachel's eyes were drawn to a series of markings that seemed to appear on the rock face. Or had they been there all along? They glowed faintly in the morning light, forming patterns similar to those in Lucas's journal. With careful movements, Rachel managed to maneuver the cub up to a wider ledge where it could easily reach its mother. The moment the cub was safe, the mother bear did something extraordinary. She stood still, facing Rachel, and seemed to nod before gently guiding her cub away from the ledge. Heart pounding, Rachel turned her attention to the crevice where she'd spotted the paper. Securing herself firmly, she reached in and extracted what turned out to be several pages torn from a notebook. The handwriting was unmistakably Lucas's, but these weren't pages she'd seen before. The first lines made her breath catch. "The bears are guardians. They've shown me the way, but I'm not sure I'm ready for what lies ahead. The markings are a language, ancient, alive, pulsing with energy. They've been trying to communicate something important." The rest of the pages were filled with sketches of markings similar to those she'd been seeing, along with notes in Lucas's increasingly excited handwriting. One phrase stood out: "The peak holds the gateway." They're inviting me to understand, but everything has to align perfectly. The bears know. They've always known. As Rachel carefully stored the pages in her waterproof case, the humming sound changed pitch, becoming more urgent. The wind picked up again, and far above, clouds began to gather around Perdition Peak's summit. She looked up at the approaching weather, then back at the direction the bears had taken. The mother bear had paused at the top of the ridge, looking back at her with those intelligent eyes. The message was clear. She needed to follow. Checking her gear one last time, Rachel began her ascent back to the upper ledge. The markings on the rocks seemed to shimmer as she passed them, and she could have sworn they were changing, rearranging themselves when she wasn't looking directly at them. The wind carried whispers now, fragments of sounds that almost formed words. Lucas's last known location had been near the summit of Perdition Peak. Now, with his newly discovered notes and the strange behavior of the bears, Rachel felt certain she was on the right path. Whatever her brother had discovered up here, whatever had drawn him to this remote place, she was getting closer to understanding it. As she reached the top of the ledge, the mother bear and cub were still waiting, their forms silhouetted against the gathering clouds. They turned and began moving up the mountain, following a path Rachel hadn't noticed before. The humming sound seemed to encourage her to follow. Looking at the pages in her hands, then up at the bears, Rachel made her decision. She was no longer just saying goodbye to her old life or seeking closure. She was on the verge of discovering what Lucas had found in these mountains, and perhaps finding her brother himself. Following the bear's trail, Rachel entered a part of the mountain she'd never seen before. The path they took seemed to appear and disappear, marked by those same mysterious symbols she'd seen earlier. The air grew thinner, but not in the usual way associated with altitude. It felt charged with energy, almost electric. The mother bear and cub moved with purpose, pausing occasionally to ensure Rachel kept pace. The humming sound had become a constant companion, varying in intensity as they progressed. Rachel consulted Lucas's newly discovered notes as she walked, her mind racing as she tried to piece together what he'd written. "The traditional maps are wrong. one passage read. There are paths here that don't follow normal geography. The bears showed me how to find them, but they only appear under certain conditions. The symbols are like waymarks, but they're also something more. They're alive somehow, changing, guiding. A sudden shift in the wind made Rachel look up from the notes. The bears had stopped at what appeared to be a solid rock wall. The mother bear pressed her paw against certain points on the surface, and Rachel gasped as she noticed the symbols beginning to glow faintly, forming a pattern she recognized from Lucas's sketches. The gateway reveals itself to those who understand its language, Lucas had written. It's not just about the symbols. It's about the rhythm, the energy, the connection to something ancient and powerful that lives in these mountains. Rachel approached the rock wall, her heart pounding. The bears watched intently as she traced the glowing symbols with her fingers. The humming sound intensified, and she felt a vibration running through the stone. As she followed the pattern, something extraordinary happened. What had appeared to be solid rock shimmered like water, revealing a narrow passage that seemed to defy the mountain's natural geometry. The mother bear nudged her cub forward, and they entered the passage. Rachel hesitated for just a moment before following. The air inside was different, warmer, dense, with an energy she couldn't explain. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence, revealing more symbols that shifted and changed as she passed. "I found something incredible," another of Lucas's notes read. "These passages, they're like arteries running through the mountain, connecting places that shouldn't be connected. The bears aren't just animals here. They're guardians of something ancient, something that's been waiting to be discovered." As they progressed deeper into the mountain, Rachel's traditional climbing gear began to malfunction. Her compass spun wildly, and her altimeter showed impossible readings. Even her satellite phone displayed only static. Yet she felt strangely calm, guided by something beyond normal navigation. The passage opened into a chamber that took her breath away. The ceiling rose high above, decorated with crystalline formations that seemed to capture and amplify the strange light. More symbols covered the walls. But these were different. They told a story in a language of light and shadow, movement and stillness. The mother bear paused in the center of the chamber, her cub close by. She turned to face Rachel, and in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The bear's eyes seemed to glow with the same light as the symbols, and Rachel felt a connection she couldn't explain, as if the bear was trying to communicate something directly to her mind. Images flooded her consciousness, glimpses of Lucas in this very chamber, working to understand the symbols, the bears guiding him deeper into the mountain's secrets, a discovery so profound it defied ordinary explanation. But there was more, a sense of urgency, of something unfinished, of a task that needed to be completed. Rachel pulled out Lucas's journal again, her hands shaking as she found a passage she'd overlooked before. "The bears aren't just showing me the way, they're preparing me for something. These mountains aren't just mountains, they're guardians of something older than human history. Something that changes those who truly understand it. I'm close to understanding, but I need more time." The humming sound reached a crescendo, and the symbols on the walls began to pulse in rhythm. The mother bear moved toward one of the walls, where a particular set of symbols glowed brighter than the others. Rachel recognized elements from Lucas's final sketches, patterns he'd drawn obsessively in his last known days. As she approached the wall, Rachel felt a surge of certainty. She wasn't just following her brother's trail anymore. She was being led to something he had discovered. Something that might explain not only his disappearance, but also the true nature of these mysterious mountains. The bears watched expectantly as Rachel raised her hand to touch the glowing symbols. The humming sound seemed to harmonize with her own heartbeat, and she could feel the mountain's energy flowing through her. In that moment, she understood what Lucas had meant in his final note. Some discoveries change everything we think we know about the world. I've found one of them, and nothing will ever be the same. When Rachel's fingers touched the glowing symbols, the entire chamber transformed. The crystalline formations above pulsed with increasing intensity, and the humming sound formed complex harmonies that seemed to resonate with something deep within her. The mother bear and cub remained perfectly still, as if witnessing a sacred ceremony. The wall beneath her fingers became warm, and the symbols began to move and shift, forming new patterns that matched sketches from the final pages of Lucas's journal. A passage Rachel had initially dismissed as fevered ramblings suddenly made perfect sense. The symbols aren't just writing, they're keys. Each pattern unlocks something different, but you have to understand their rhythm, their flow. The bears know the sequences. They've always known. As if responding to her thoughts, the mother bear approached and pressed her paw against another section of the wall. The symbols there began to pulse in sequence, creating a pattern that Rachel recognized from Lucas's notes. Without hesitation, she followed the sequence, touching each symbol in turn. The humming changed pitch, and a section of the chamber wall simply dissolved. Beyond lay another chamber, but this one was different. The walls were covered in what looked like star charts, but the constellations were unlike any Rachel had ever seen. In the center of the room stood a pedestal of crystalline rock, and on it lay something that made her heart skip a beat. Lucas's advanced GPS unit, the one he'd been carrying when he disappeared. "The traditional maps are useless here," she read from another of Lucas's notes as she approached the pedestal. "These chambers follow their own geography. The bears showed me how to navigate them. But it took time to understand. The mountain itself is like a vast puzzle box, with each chamber leading to another revelation." The GPS unit was still intact, its screen dark but undamaged. When Rachel picked it up, it powered on immediately, despite having been here for years. But instead of showing normal coordinates, the screen displayed a series of symbols similar to those on the walls. Below it, she found a small notebook she recognized as Lucas's field journal, one that hadn't been found with his other belongings. The bears moved to the center of the chamber, their attention focused on a particular section of the star chart. The cub pressed its paw against one of the constellations, and the entire chart began to shift and change, revealing new patterns and connections. Rachel opened the field journal with trembling hands. The first entry was dated just days before Lucas's disappearance. "I've finally begun to understand. These chambers aren't just hidden spaces in the mountain, they're nexus points, places where the normal rules of space and time work differently. The bears aren't just guides, they're guardians of these spaces, protecting them until someone worthy comes to understand their secrets." As she read further, the humming sound changed again, becoming more complex. Almost like music, the crystal formations in this chamber began to resonate in response, creating patterns of light that danced across the star charts. Rachel noticed that certain symbols in Lucas's GPS unit pulsed in sync with these patterns. "The GPS doesn't show location," she realized, reading Lucas's notes. "It's tracking the energy patterns, the flow of whatever power runs through these chambers." His later entries became more excited, more urgent. "Each chamber reveals another piece of the puzzle. The bears led me to 7 of them so far, but I sense there are more. The final chamber, that's where everything connects. That's where the true nature of these mountains will be revealed." The mother bear suddenly became alert, her attention focused on a particular constellation in the star chart. As Rachel watched, the symbols within that section began to pulse with increasing intensity. She consulted Lucas's journal again, finding a passage that made her breath catch. "The alignment is crucial. When the stars match the pattern in the final chamber, something extraordinary happens. I've seen it once, briefly. The bears have been preparing me for when it happens again." Looking at the date of that entry, Rachel made a stunning realization. The astronomical alignment Lucas described was due to occur again in less than 24 hours. The bear's timing in finding her, leading her here, it couldn't be coincidence. The cub approached her, gently nudging her toward another section of the chamber. There, partially hidden behind a crystal formation, she found a map unlike any she'd seen before. It showed Perdition Peak, but overlaid with patterns of energy lines and symbols that matched those in the GPS unit. Several chambers were marked, forming a complex geometric pattern. At the summit, a final chamber was indicated, marked with symbols that seemed to pulse with their own light. "The summit chamber is different," Lucas had written. "It's where everything converges. The bears showed me how to find it. But the timing has to be perfect. When the alignment comes, the chamber opens fully, revealing what these mountains have been protecting all these years." Rachel looked at the mother bear, who met her gaze with those intelligent eyes. The message was clear. They needed to reach the summit chamber before the alignment, but first she needed to understand the sequence of symbols, the pattern that would grant her access. The humming sound grew more insistent, and the crystal formations pulsed with increasing urgency. Time was running out, and Rachel knew that somewhere above them, in a chamber near the summit of Perdition Peak, the answers to all her questions, and perhaps Lucas himself, were waiting. The ascent toward Perdition Peak's summit took on a dreamlike quality as Rachel followed the bears through a series of interconnected chambers, each one revealing new wonders and challenges. The traditional laws of physics seemed to bend around them. Passages that should have taken hours to traverse were completed in minutes, while other sections seemed to stretch time itself. "The mountain doesn't follow normal rules here," Lucas had written. "Time flows differently in these chambers, sometimes faster, sometimes slower. The bears understand this. They navigate not just through space, but through time itself." The mother bear led them through passages that seemed to defy geometry, while the cub bounded ahead, occasionally stopping to activate symbols that opened new pathways. Rachel's altimeter had given up entirely, showing impossible readings that jumped between depths and heights that couldn't exist on any normal mountain. They emerged briefly onto an outer ledge, and Rachel gasped at the view. The sun was setting, painting the sky in dramatic purples and oranges. But what caught her attention was the alignment of the stars already visible in the darkening sky. They matched exactly the pattern she'd seen in the chamber below. "The alignment is beginning," she whispered. Consulting Lucas's journal, according to his notes, they had less than 12 hours before the perfect convergence would occur, the moment when the summit chamber would fully reveal its secrets. The mother bear growled softly, drawing Rachel's attention to an approaching storm system. Dark clouds rolled in with unnatural speed, carrying that same humming energy she'd felt throughout her journey. Lightning flickered within the clouds, but instead of normal white-blue bolts, these seemed to pulse with colors that shouldn't exist in nature. "The weather responds to the mountain's energy," Lucas had noted. "When the alignment approaches, everything intensifies. The bears showed me how to read these signs, how to navigate through the chaos." They retreated into another chamber just as the storm hit. This one was different from the others, smaller, more intimate, and filled with crystals that seemed to capture and amplify the lightning's strange colors. As Rachel watched, the crystals began to form patterns that matched the symbols in Lucas's GPS unit. The cub approached one particular crystal formation and pressed its paw against it. The entire chamber hummed with energy, and new symbols appeared on the walls. These ones more urgent, more complex than any Rachel had seen before. "The final sequence is the key," she read from Lucas's last entry. "Each chamber has taught me part of it, but it all comes together at the summit. The bears know the full pattern. They've been testing me, preparing me. When the alignment peaks, Everything has to be perfect. Rachel's fingers traced the symbols, following the pattern the bears had shown her throughout their journey. Each correct sequence made the crystals pulse brighter, and she could feel the energy building around them. The mother bear watched approvingly, her eyes reflecting the mysterious lights. The storm outside intensified, and the humming sound reached new frequencies that seemed to resonate with something deep within the mountain itself. Rachel felt it in her bones, a vibration that spoke of ancient powers and hidden truths waiting to be discovered. "It's not just about reaching the summit," Lucas had written in his final notes. It's about understanding what these mountains really are, what they're protecting. The bears aren't just guides, they're gatekeepers. What lies beyond that final gate? It's beyond anything I could have imagined." As if in response to her thoughts, the mother bear led them to a new passage, one that seemed to spiral upward through the heart of the mountain. The walls here were different, transparent in places, revealing layers of crystal and energy that pulsed in rhythm with the storm outside. Rachel checked the time. 10 hours until the perfect alignment. The bears moved with increased urgency now, and she understood why. Each chamber they passed through showed signs of building energy, the symbols glowing brighter, the humming growing more intense. They reached a junction where 3 passages converged. The mother bear paused, studying each option carefully. Rachel pulled out the GPS unit, watching as new symbols appeared on its screen. They matched a pattern in Lucas's notes. The final approach has 3 paths. Only one leads to the summit chamber, but it changes with each alignment. Choose wrong, and the chamber remains sealed for another cycle. The cub moved to one of the passages and emitted a soft whine. The mother bear approached, studied the symbols near the entrance, then looked back at Rachel expectantly. This was another test. She needed to decode the correct sequence herself. Rachel spread out Lucas's notes, comparing the symbols on the walls to his sketches. The storm's energy seemed to flow through the passages differently, and the crystals in each one pulsed with distinct patterns. She remembered Lucas's words, "The bears can show you the way, but understanding must come from within." Each choice reveals whether you're truly ready for what lies ahead. As she studied the patterns, something clicked in her mind. A connection between the star charts she'd seen below, the strange weather above, and the energy flowing through the mountain. The correct path wasn't just about following symbols. It was about feeling the mountain's rhythm, understanding its pulse. Rachel took a deep breath and stepped toward one of the passages. The crystals along its walls began to glow brighter, and the humming sound harmonized with her heartbeat. The bears moved to join her, confirming her choice. Above them, through the crystalline layers of the mountain, she could see the storm reaching its peak. The summit was close now, and with it the answers she'd been seeking. Somewhere up there, in a chamber that existed between normal space and time, the truth about Lucas awaited. The bears led the way forward, their forms silhouetted against the glowing crystals. Rachel followed, her heart pounding with anticipation and a touch of fear. Whatever lay ahead would change everything she thought she knew about reality itself. The passage they'd chosen twisted upward through the mountain's heart, defying normal geometry. Crystal formations grew denser, their light pulsing in complex patterns that seemed to respond to Rachel's presence. The bears moved with increased urgency, their forms casting elongated shadows that danced across the luminescent walls. The storm above had reached supernatural intensity. Through the crystalline sections of the passage, Rachel could see bolts of impossible lightning splitting the sky in colors that shouldn't exist. Deep purples, emerald greens, and colors she had no words to describe. The humming had evolved into a complex symphony that seemed to carry meaning just beyond her understanding. "The final approach changes you," Lucas had written in one of his last entries. "Reality becomes flexible." What you think you know about the world starts to shift. The bears guide you through it, but your mind has to adapt or you'll lose yourself in the transformation. Rachel understood those words now, in a way she couldn't have hours ago. Her perception had begun to alter. She could feel the mountain's energy flowing through the crystals, could almost see the patterns of power that Lucas had described in his notes. The bears no longer seemed like mere animals. Their presence radiated an ancient wisdom that transcended ordinary consciousness. They reached a chamber unlike any before. The walls were completely transparent, revealing layers upon layers of reality, all existing simultaneously. Rachel watched in awe as scenes played out in these layers. Moments from the mountain's past, present, and what seemed like possible futures, all overlapping and interacting. The mother bear paused, turning to face Rachel with those knowing eyes. In one of the reality layers, Rachel saw a figure that made her heart stop. Lucas, younger but unmistakable, following the same bears through this very chamber. The scene shifted, showing him working with the symbols, learning their meanings, growing closer to understanding the mountain's true nature. "Oh, the chamber shows you what you need to see," his notes had said. "Time isn't linear here. Everything that has happened, is happening, or might happen exists in layers. The bears helped me understand how to navigate through them, but the final step, that's something each person has to figure out for themselves." The cub approached one of the crystalline walls and pressed its paw against it. The surface rippled like water, and new symbols appeared, more complex than any Rachel had seen before. They seemed to shift and change as she watched, telling a story that went beyond words. Rachel pulled out Lucas's GPS unit and journal, comparing the symbols to his final notes. "The summit chamber exists in all realities simultaneously," he'd written. "Finding the right layer, the right moment to enter. That's the key. The bears know when the alignments are perfect, when the boundaries between realities are thinnest." The humming reached a new intensity, and Rachel felt a shift in the energy around them. The mother bear moved to another section of the chamber, indicating a series of symbols that pulsed with increasing urgency. According to Lucas's notes, they had less than 6 hours until the perfect alignment. Through the crystalline walls, Rachel could see Perdition Peak's summit. The storm had created a swirling vortex of energy above it, the strange colored lightning forming patterns that matched the symbols in the chamber. She noticed something else too. In certain layers of reality, a structure was visible at the summit, something that seemed to exist between dimensions. The summit chamber isn't just a physical place, Lucas had noted. It's a nexus point where multiple realities converge. The bears guard it, guide those who are ready to understand its purpose, but entering it, that requires perfect timing and complete understanding of the symbols. The cub suddenly became alert, its attention fixed on a particular section of the chamber where the reality layers seemed to pulse and shift more rapidly. Rachel approached, feeling the energy intensify with each step. In one layer, she saw Lucas again, this time closer to the time of his disappearance. He was transcribing symbols into his journal, his expression one of wonder and revelation. The mother bear pressed her paw against another crystal formation, and a new passage opened, one that seemed to exist in multiple reality layers simultaneously. Rachel consulted the GPS unit, watching as new symbols appeared on its screen. They matched a pattern in Lucas's final notes. The approach to the summit chamber requires moving through multiple layers of reality. Choose the wrong layer, and you'll miss the alignment completely. Rachel studied the overlapping realities visible through the passage walls. In some layers, the passage led to solid rock. In others, it continued upward toward the summit. The bears waited patiently as she analyzed the patterns, remembering everything she'd learned about the mountain's strange physics. The storm's energy surged, and Rachel felt something click in her understanding. The symbols weren't just a code to be broken. They were a language that described the very nature of reality itself. Lucas had been learning to read this language, to understand how the mountain could exist in multiple states simultaneously. With newfound confidence, Rachel began to trace the symbols in the sequence she'd decoded. The bears watched approvingly as the passage shifted, aligning itself with the correct layer of reality. The path to the summit was clear now, but Rachel knew the greatest challenges still lay ahead. As they prepared to enter the passage, Rachel felt a profound shift in her perception. The boundary between observer and observed, between past and present, between different layers of reality, all were becoming fluid, just as Lucas had described in his final notes. The summit chamber waited above, holding answers that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the nature of existence itself. The final ascent through the reality-shifting passage pushed Rachel's perception to its limits. Each step seemed to take her through multiple versions of the mountain simultaneously. The bears moved with practiced ease through these overlapping realities, their forms sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, but always present as guides. The storm above had reached impossible intensity. Lightning in colors beyond natural spectrum created patterns in the sky that matched the ancient symbols Rachel had been studying. The humming sound had become a chorus of otherworldly frequencies that seemed to speak directly to her consciousness. "When you reach the threshold of the summit chamber," Lucas had written, "everything you think you know about reality breaks down. The bears showed me that our normal understanding of space and time is just the surface of something far more complex." They emerged onto a platform that shouldn't have been possible. A flat space near Perdition Peak's summit that seemed to exist in all realities at once. The platform was ringed with crystalline formations that pulsed with internal light, each one showing different versions of the same moment. The mother bear and cub took positions at opposite sides of the platform, their forms now radiating an energy that made them appear almost ethereal. The GPS unit in Rachel's hand suddenly came alive, its screen displaying rapidly changing symbols that matched the patterns forming in the storm above. The summit chamber reveals itself only when everything aligns perfectly, Lucas's notes had said. The physical alignment of the stars, the energy patterns in the mountain, and most importantly, the readiness of the observer to perceive what truly exists here. Rachel checked the time. Less than an hour remained until the perfect alignment. The platform beneath her feet began to pulse with energy, and in the overlapping realities visible through the crystals, she saw countless versions of this moment playing out simultaneously. In one crystal, she saw Lucas standing exactly where she was now, his face illuminated by the same strange light. In another, she saw him working with the symbols, getting closer to understanding their true meaning, and in yet another, she caught a glimpse that made her heart race. Lucas, but not as he had been 5 years ago. He appeared somehow both older and younger, changed in ways she couldn't quite define. The mother bear approached the center of the platform, pressing her paw against a circular pattern of symbols. The entire summit seemed to vibrate with energy, and the storm above intensified. Rachel felt the humming sound resonate with something deep within her consciousness, unlocking understanding that went beyond normal human perception. "The bears aren't just guardians," she read from Lucas's final entry. "They're keepers of knowledge that predates humanity itself. The mountain isn't just a mountain, it's a gateway, a place where the fundamental nature of reality reveals itself to those who are ready to understand." The cub joined its mother in the center, and together they began a movement that seemed almost ceremonial. The symbols on the platform responded to their presence, creating patterns of light that spiraled outward. Rachel recognized the sequence from Lucas's notes and began to follow it, her fingers tracing the glowing patterns. As she completed each sequence, More of the summit chamber's true nature revealed itself. The air shimmered with energy, and through the various layers of reality, Rachel could see a structure taking form, something that existed between dimensions, a space that defied normal physics. The chamber exists everywhere and nowhere, Lucas had written. It's a nexus point where all possibilities converge. When you understand how to perceive it properly, you realize it's always been there, hidden in plain sight. The storm reached its peak, and the lightning formed a vortex directly above the platform. Through the swirling energy, Rachel could see the stars aligning into the pattern she'd studied in the lower chambers. The humming sound changed frequency, becoming something she felt rather than heard. The bears moved in perfect synchronization, activating more symbols across the platform. Rachel followed their lead, applying everything she'd learned about the mountain's strange language. With each correct sequence, the chamber became more visible, more real. Through one of the crystal formations, she caught another glimpse of Lucas that made her pause. He was performing these exact same movements, but in a different layer of reality. The image was clearer now, more present. Rachel could feel the barriers between realities growing thinner with each passing moment. The final alignment isn't just about the stars, Lucas's notes had revealed. It's about aligning consciousness itself with the true nature of reality. The bears guide you to this understanding. But making the final connection, that's a choice each person has to make for themselves. The mother bear turned to Rachel, her eyes now glowing with the same energy that pulsed through the crystals. In that moment, Rachel felt a direct communication, not in words, but in pure understanding. She saw what Lucas had discovered, what had led him to this point, and what choice lay before her. The summit chamber was nearly visible now, existing in a space between all possible realities. Through its translucent walls, Rachel could see movements, figures, glimpses of things that challenged her understanding of what was possible. And there, at its center, she saw something that made her heart stop. A familiar figure, waiting. The alignment was moments away from perfection. The bears took their final positions, and Rachel understood what she needed to do. With trembling hands, she began the final sequence of symbols, knowing that what came next would change everything forever. As Rachel completed the final sequence of symbols, the summit chamber fully materialized around her. The structure that had existed between realities became solid, yet somehow remained ethereal, a space that defied normal physics while being undeniably real. The bears stood as silent guardians, their forms now radiating pure energy as the perfect alignment reached its peak. The storm above had transformed into a swirling vortex of light and color, the strange lightning creating patterns that matched the ancient symbols throughout the chamber. The humming sound reached a crescendo that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of reality itself. Through the crystalline walls, Rachel could see all possible versions of this moment happening simultaneously. And there, in the center of it all, stood Lucas. He wasn't exactly as she remembered him. He seemed to exist in multiple states at once, both older and younger, changed by his time in this place between realities. But his smile was exactly the same as she remembered, full of wonder and warmth. "I knew you'd figure it out," he said, his voice carrying echoes of the mountain's strange harmonies. "The bears chose you, just like they chose me. They knew you'd understand." Rachel moved toward him, her heart racing. "Lucas, all this time, you've been here, in this place between realities." He nodded, gesturing to the chamber around them. "Time doesn't work the same way here. Rachel, what's been 5 years for you has been both an eternity and an instant for me. The bears showed me something incredible, something that changes everything we think we know about reality." The mother bear and cub approached them, their forms now clearly revealed as something far more ancient and powerful than mere animals. Through their presence, Rachel began to understand what Lucas had discovered. The mountains weren't just mountains. They were anchor points for something vast and profound, places where the true nature of reality revealed itself to those ready to perceive it. The symbols aren't just a language, Lucas explained, touching one of the glowing patterns on the chamber wall. They're keys to understanding how reality itself works. The bears aren't just guardians, they're teachers, showing us that what we think of as solid reality is just one layer of something much more complex. Through the chamber's walls, Rachel could see multiple versions of history playing out simultaneously. She saw Lucas's disappearance from the perspective of normal reality, but also saw how he had stepped into this space between dimensions, choosing to learn the deeper truths the mountains held. "But why didn't you come back?" Rachel asked. Though she was beginning to understand the answer even as she spoke, Lucas's expression grew serious. "Because what I found here needs to be protected and understood. The bears showed me that there are moments when realities can align, when the barriers between dimensions grow thin. These mountains are crucial points where different layers of existence intersect. Someone needs to help maintain that balance, to guide others who are ready to understand." The humming sound changed pitch, and the bears moved to activate new symbols around the chamber. Rachel felt understanding flood through her consciousness. This wasn't just about finding Lucas. It was about a choice, a threshold she now stood upon. "The Academy, your plans," Lucas said softly. "You wanted to protect people, to make a difference. But there are different ways to do that. The bears chose you because they saw in you what they saw in me, someone who could understand the deeper truths, someone who could help protect the balance between realities." Rachel looked around the chamber, seeing the infinite possibilities that stretched out before her. Through the crystalline walls, she could see her life as it had been, and as it could be. The bears watched her, their ancient wisdom evident in their gaze. "You don't have to stay," Lucas said gently. "You can return to your life, carry this understanding with you, or you can choose what I chose, to become part of something larger, to help protect these spaces where reality reveals its true nature." The alignment reached its absolute peak, and the chamber filled with pure energy. Rachel felt complete clarity in that moment. All her training, her survival skills, her deep connection to these mountains, it had all led her to this choice. She looked at Lucas, then at the bears, and finally at the swirling patterns of reality visible through the chamber walls. Her decision crystallized with absolute certainty. "I understand now," she said, her voice carrying the same harmonic resonance that filled the chamber. "This is what I've been preparing for all along." The bears moved to form a circle around them, and Lucas smiled, the same smile that had encouraged her first attempts at climbing, that had guided her through countless challenges. Rachel felt the mountain's energy flow through her, transforming her understanding of what was possible. She didn't need to speak her choice aloud. The bears, Lucas, and the mountain itself all understood. As the alignment began to shift, Rachel took her place in this space between realities, ready to help protect and guide others who might be ready to understand the deeper truths she now knew. The storm above began to calm, but its energy remained, transformed into something new. Through the chamber walls, Rachel could see both the life she was leaving behind and the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. She was no longer just Rachel West, the climber from Cody. She had become something more, a guardian of the spaces where reality revealed its true nature. Lucas placed a hand on her shoulder, and together they looked out at the multitude of realities visible through the crystal walls. The bears stood beside them, their ancient wisdom now a part of Rachel's understanding. The mountain hummed with energy, acknowledging its new guardian. This wasn't an ending, Rachel realized. It was a beginning, a step into a larger world of possibilities and responsibilities. The mysteries of Perdition Peak had led her not just to Lucas, but to her true purpose. And somewhere, in the reality she'd left behind. The legend of the West siblings would live on in the whispered stories of those who visited these mountains, adding to the mystery that helped protect this sacred space where all realities converged. Dear readers, we hope that Mark Thompson's mystical journey through the secrets of the Starlight Circus has touched your hearts. To continue exploring worlds where magic and reality intertwine, we've prepared a special playlist with equally enchanting stories. Find it here by clicking on the left. If this story has sparked your imagination, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day, we bring new narratives that explore the boundaries between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Share your own stories of magical moments in the comments below. Magic is everywhere. You just need to know where to look.